The messenger arrived at Lord Damien Ashford's fortress covered in frost and blood that was not his own. He collapsed at the threshold, his final words escaping in a rattled whisper before unconsciousness claimed him. Thornfield has fallen. The dawn hunt comes. One child survived. She runs. Then silence, and the weight of impossible choices settled over Damien like a funeral shroud. Thornfield was 3 hours away by the fastest horse. Through a snowstorm that had already claimed 4 travelers that week, the dawn hunt, that merciless band of mortal fanatics who slaughtered any human found sheltering with vampires, would reach the fleeing child before sunrise. Every Lord Damien knew would call it suicide to ride into that frozen hell. Every instinct screamed that one mortal child was not worth an ancient vampire's existence. But Damien was already calling for his nightmare stallion before the messenger's body had been carried to warmth, because he knew something the other lords had forgotten. He knew what it meant to be the last survivor. He had been one himself, once, in a time before his turning, when everyone he loved had been taken, and the world had offered nothing but darkness and the choice to keep moving or die. The storm had been building for 3 days, gathering strength over the northern mountains like a predator preparing to strike. Now it descended with fury that seemed almost personal, wind screaming across the frozen landscape, snow falling so thick that visibility dropped to mere feet. Damien's stallion, Tempest, was no ordinary horse. The nightmare had been bound to him for 2 centuries, a creature of shadow and fire that feared nothing the natural world could produce. But even Tempest hesitated at the fortress gates, dark eyes rolling as he sensed what waited beyond. "I know," Damien murmured, his hand finding the stallion's neck. "I know what I'm asking. But there is a child out there, alone and hunted, and I will not let her die because the weather frightened me." Tempest snorted, breath emerging as black smoke that dissipated into the howling wind. Then the nightmare surged forward, hooves striking frozen ground with sounds like distant thunder, carrying his master into the white chaos of the storm. The psychic channels erupted almost immediately, other lords sensing Damien's departure and reaching out with confusion, concern, and in some cases, contempt. Lord Victor Coldrane's voice cut through first, sharp with disbelief. "Ashford, what madness possesses you? You ride into a killing storm for what purpose?" "Thornfield has fallen," Damien transmitted back, his mental voice steady despite the wind tearing at his cloak. "The dawn hunt massacred everyone. One child escaped. I go to find her." "One child?" Lord Marcus Dreadmore's response carried the particular disdain of ancient vampires who had long since stopped seeing mortals as anything but prey or inconvenience. "You risk your existence for a single mortal child? Have you finally succumbed to the madness that claims the very old?" Damien did not bother responding. The other lords would never understand, could never understand, what drove him into this frozen nightmare. They had been vampires for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to be human, forgotten the terror of being hunted, forgotten the desperate hope that someone, anyone, might come to help when all seemed lost. He had not forgotten. He would never forget. The road to Thornfield was barely visible beneath the accumulated snow, marked only by the occasional fence post or frozen tree that emerged from the white like ghosts of a vanished world. Damien guided Tempest more by instinct than sight, trusting the nightmare's supernatural senses to find safe passage where his own eyes failed. The cold was brutal, even for a vampire. Damien could feel it seeping through his enchanted clothing, could feel his ancient blood growing sluggish in his veins. Lesser vampires would have turned back already, would have recognized that some rescues were simply impossible. But Damien had never been good at recognizing impossible. He had been told it was impossible to survive the massacre that had claimed his mortal family. He had been told it was impossible to retain his humanity after being turned against his will. He had been told it was impossible to build a territory where vampires and mortals coexisted in something resembling peace. He had proven them wrong every time. He would prove them wrong tonight. An hour into the journey, Tempest stumbled. The nightmare recovered quickly, but Damien felt the tremor of exhaustion running through the creature's supernatural frame. Even shadow-born horses had limits, and this storm was testing every one of them. "A little further," Damien urged, leaning close to the stallion's ear. "A little further, and then you can rest. I promise." Tempest responded with another surge of speed, drawing on reserves that should have been depleted, pushing through snow that reached his chest in places. The nightmare had been with Damien since the beginning of his vampire existence. It carried him through battles and escapes and journeys that would have killed any normal mount. If any creature could survive this storm, it was Tempest. But the child they sought had no nightmare stallion, had no supernatural endurance, had only mortal legs and mortal lungs and the desperate will to survive that Damien remembered all too well from his own flight through darkness centuries ago. The psychic channels continued to buzz with commentary. Other lords debating Damien's sanity, placing wagers on whether he would survive, speculating about what madness had driven him to such extreme action. Damien ignored them all, focusing instead on the faint pulse of mortal life he could sense somewhere ahead, growing weaker with each passing minute. She was still alive, still running, still fighting against the cold and the hunters and the despair that must be overwhelming her small heart. "Hold on," Damien whispered into the wind, knowing she could not hear him, hoping somehow that his determination might reach her anyway. "Hold on, little one. I am coming." The storm answered with a howl of fury, as if offended by his defiance, as if determined to prove that some things truly were impossible. Damien lowered his head against the wind and rode on, because impossible had never stopped him before, and he would not let it stop him now. Not when a child's life hung in the balance. Not when he knew exactly what she was feeling, alone in the darkness, with death closing in from every direction. Not when he had the power to help, and the choice was simply whether to use it. 2 hours into the ride, Damien found the first body, a woman, frozen mid-stride, her arms still reaching forward as though she had been trying to grasp something just beyond her fingertips. Her face was peaceful in the way that only the frozen dead could be, the final terror smoothed away by the cold that had claimed her. She wore the simple clothing of a village servant, and around her neck hung a pendant bearing the symbol of Thornfield's vampire lord, the mark of protection that was supposed to keep her safe from the dawn hunt. The pendant had not saved her. Nothing had saved her. Damien dismounted briefly, his boots sinking into snow that reached his knees. He knelt beside the body and closed her eyes with gentle fingers, murmuring words of passage that he had learned centuries ago. Words that probably meant nothing, but felt necessary nonetheless. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I am sorry I was not faster." The woman did not respond. The dead never did. But Damien carried her face with him as he remounted Tempest and continued forward, adding her to the collection of ghosts that haunted his ancient memory. She was the first, but she would not be the last. He could sense more bodies ahead, scattered along the road like discarded dolls. The trail of destruction left by villagers fleeing a massacre only to find death waiting in the storm. Lord Victor's voice intruded on his thoughts, the psychic connection carrying a tone of grim satisfaction. "You see now what awaits you, Ashford? The road to Thornfield is littered with corpses. Everyone who fled is dead. Your mysterious child is surely among them?" "She is not," Damien responded, his mental voice carrying certainty he did not entirely feel. "I can sense her. She still lives. You sense what you wish to sense. The cold plays tricks on ancient minds. Turn back while you still can. There is no shame in recognizing a lost cause." Damien closed the channel without responding. Victor meant well, in his way. The older lord had survived from millennia by knowing when to cut his losses, when to abandon hopeless endeavors, when to accept that some battles could not be won. It was a practical philosophy, one that had kept Victor alive through wars and purges and the rise and fall of mortal empires. But Damien had never been practical. Practicality would have seen him dead centuries ago, would have seen him surrender to despair after his mortal family was slaughtered, would have seen him accept his turning as the end of everything good, rather than the beginning of something different. Practicality was for those who had never learned that sometimes the impossible was simply the untried. The storm intensified as he pressed forward, wind now carrying ice that stung even his immortal skin. Tempest was laboring visibly, each stride requiring effort that would have killed a natural horse hours ago. Damien considered stopping, considered giving the nightmare a chance to recover, but the pulse of mortal life ahead was growing weaker. The child was failing. The cold was winning. He pushed on. The second body was a man, older, his hand still clutching a wooden staff that had been snapped in half. He had been trying to fight something, perhaps the storm itself, perhaps the hunters who had driven him from his home. His face was not peaceful. His face was frozen in an expression of defiance that Damien recognized, the look of someone who had refused to surrender even as death closed in. "You fought well," Damien told him, though he knew the man could not hear. "You fought until the end. That is all anyone can do." The third body was smaller. A child, perhaps 8 years old, curled against the base of a tree as though seeking shelter that the bare branches could not provide. Damien's ancient heart clenched at the sight, and for a moment he could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything but stare at the small form that represented everything he was trying to prevent. But this was not his child. This was not the survivor he sought. The pulse of life he had been following still beat ahead, faint but persistent, a candle flame refusing to be extinguished by the hurricane around it. He forced himself to continue, leaving the small body behind, carrying its image with him into the storm. 3 deaths. 3 people who had trusted in vampire protection and found only massacre. 3 souls who had fled into the night hoping to find safety and found only cold. How many more bodies lay between him and the survivor? How many more ghosts would he accumulate before this night was over? The psychic channels had gone quiet, other lords apparently losing interest in his doomed mission. Damien was grateful for the silence. He needed to focus, needed to concentrate on the faint life force that was his only guide through this frozen hell. She was close now, perhaps a mile ahead, perhaps less. He could sense her exhaustion, her terror, the desperate determination that kept her moving when every rational thought must be screaming at her to stop, to rest, to let the cold take away the pain. "Do not stop," he urged, pushing the thought toward her with all the strength he possessed. "Do not give up. I am almost there." He did not know if she could hear him. Mortals rarely possess the sensitivity to receive vampire communication. But he sent the message anyway, hoping that somehow his will might reach her, might give her the strength to take one more step, then another, then another. Tempest stumbled again, more severely this time. The nightmare went down on one knee, and Damien was thrown forward, barely managing to keep his seat. He could feel the creature's distress, could sense the supernatural energy that powered Tempest's existence, flickering like a candle in a draft. "I know," Damien said, sliding from the saddle to lighten the nightmare's burden. "I know you have given everything. Rest now. I will continue on foot." Tempest made a sound of protest, dark eyes rolling with distress at being left behind. But the nightmare could go no further, and both of them knew it. Damien pressed his forehead against the stallion's neck in a gesture of gratitude and farewell. "Find shelter. Recover. I will call for you when this is over." Then he turned and walked into the storm, leaving his faithful companion behind, moving toward the faint pulse of life that was all that remained of Thornfield's people. One child. One survivor. One chance to prove that impossible was just another word for difficult. Walking through the storm was different from riding. Slower, more brutal, the cold finding every gap in Damien's clothing, the wind stealing strength with every gust. Snow reached his thighs in places, forcing him to wade rather than walk, each step a battle against an element that seemed determined to stop him. But the pulse of life ahead was stronger now, closer. He could sense details that distance had obscured before. The survivor was young, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, female, terrified beyond anything she had ever experienced. And still moving, still fighting, still refusing to surrender to the death that pursued her. Damien pushed harder, forcing his ancient body through drifts that would have buried a mortal completely. His legs burned with effort. His lungs, which had not truly needed air for centuries, ached from the cold that invaded them with each breath. He was weakening, he realized. The storm was draining him in ways that battle never had, but he was also gaining. The distance between them was shrinking. Minutes now, not hours. If she could hold on just a little longer, if she could keep moving for just a few more desperate moments, he would reach her. The dawn hunt reached her first. Damien heard the voices before he saw them, carried on the wind like the howls of wolves closing on wounded prey. Men's voices rough with cold and cruel with purpose, calling to each other through the storm. "She went this way. I can see her tracks. Circle around. Don't let her reach the tree line. The sun rises in 2 hours. We finish this before dawn." Damien's blood, already cold from the storm, froze further at those words. The dawn hunt. Fanatics who believed that any human who accepted vampire protection had betrayed their own kind, who slaughtered entire villages to purify them of vampire influence, who considered children as guilty as adults in their twisted theology of hate. They had destroyed Thornfield. They had driven its people into the storm. And now they hunted the last survivor. A child who had committed no crime except living in a village where vampires and mortals had coexisted in peace. Damien moved faster, abandoning caution for speed. The storm had become almost secondary now, the cold and wind mere obstacles rather than the primary enemy. The true enemy was ahead. Mortal men with mortal weapons and a hatred so pure it had become its own kind of evil. He burst through a wall of snow and found them. 5 hunters, spread in a loose semicircle, closing on a small figure that stood with her back against a massive oak tree. The child was tiny, dark-haired, wearing clothes that had once been warm but were now soaked through and freezing against her small body. She held a branch in both hands like a weapon, her stance defiant despite the terror in her eyes. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice cracking with cold and fear. "Stay away from me," the hunters laughed. One of them, larger than the others and clearly the leader, stepped forward with a sword drawn. "Little girl, you have nowhere to run. Your vampire masters are dead. Your village is ashes. Accept your fate with dignity. I didn't do anything wrong." The child's voice broke into a sob, but she did not lower her branch. "We just lived there. We just wanted to live. You lived with monsters. That makes you a monster too." The leader raised his sword. "The dawn will cleanse your soul." "No," Damien said, stepping out of the storm like a nightmare made flesh. "It will not." The hunters spun toward him, their expressions shifting from cruel confidence to sudden terror. They had not heard him approach, had not sensed him until he chose to reveal himself. Now they faced an ancient vampire, pale as the snow around him, eyes burning with crimson fury. "Vampire!" one of them screamed, stumbling backward. "There's a vampire!" The leader held his ground, though his sword trembled visibly. "Stand firm. He is weakened by the cold. There are 5 of us and 1 of him." "You are correct about the numbers," Damien said, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "You are wrong about everything else." He moved. Vampire speed was difficult to describe to those who had never witnessed it. One moment Damien stood at the edge of the clearing. The next moment he stood behind the first hunter, who had not yet realized that his throat had been opened. The man fell, and Damien was already moving to the second. Then the third, his movements a blur of violence so fast that human eyes could not track it. The 4th hunter managed to swing his sword, a desperate strike that might have connected with a slower opponent. Damien caught the blade in his bare hand, feeling the metal bite into his palm, feeling the pain that meant nothing compared to the fury driving him. He wrenched the sword away and used it against its owner in a single fluid motion. That left the leader. The man stood frozen, his sword still raised, his face a mask of terror as he watched his companions fall in seconds. He was older than the others, scarred from previous hunts, experienced in the killing of those he deemed impure. But all his experience had not prepared him for this. Nothing could have prepared him for an ancient vampire defending a child with the full force of centuries of accumulated power. "You hunt children," Damien said, walking toward the leader with deliberate slowness. "You slaughter innocents. You call yourself righteous while committing atrocities that would shame any true believer." "We serve the dawn," the leader managed, his voice shaking. "We purify the world of vampire corruption." "You corrupt the world with your hatred." Damien stopped inches from the man, close enough to see the fierce sweat freezing on his brow. "You take everything that is good about humanity and twist it into something monstrous. You are the true monsters here, not her, not the villagers you murdered. You." The leader's sword fell from nerveless fingers. "Please, mercy." Damien considered the request. Considered the bodies in the snow, the frozen child beneath the tree, the countless victims this man had claimed in the name of his twisted faith. "Did you show mercy to them?" Damien asked quietly. "Did you show mercy to anyone?" The leader had no answer. His silence was confession enough. Damien's hand closed around his throat. The leader's body fell to join his companions. 5 hunters who would never hunt again. 5 fanatics whose hatred had finally met something stronger than their conviction. Damien stood among them, his breath coming hard despite his immortal endurance. The fury that had driven him slowly fading into something colder and more complicated. He had killed before. Many times, across many centuries. But he had never enjoyed it, had never taken pleasure in the violence his nature made so easy. Tonight was no different. The hunters had earned their deaths, had chosen their fates when they chose to hunt children. But their blood on his hands still felt like a weight he would carry forward into the endless nights ahead. The child had not moved from her position against the oak tree, still held her branch like a weapon, her eyes wide and fixed on Damien with an expression that held terror and hope in equal measure. She had watched him kill 5 men in seconds. She did not know yet whether she would be next. Damien forced himself to stillness, to calm, to the gentle demeanor he had learned to adopt when dealing with frightened mortals. He sank slowly to one knee, bringing his eyes level with hers, making himself smaller and less threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice soft despite the wind howling around them. "I came to help you. Do you understand?" The child stared at him, her small body trembling with cold and shock. "You're a vampire." "Yes, vampires killed Lord Ashford's family, that's what the hunters said. They said all vampires are evil." Damien felt a strange twist in his chest at the mention of his own name, at the lies the hunters had told to justify their massacre. "I am Lord Ashford, and my family was not killed by vampires. They were killed by men like those." He gestured at the bodies in the snow. "Men who fear what they do not understand. Men who hate what is different." The child's branch lowered slightly, confusion replacing some of the terror. "You're Lord Ashford? From the big fortress?" "Yes. A messenger reached me. He told me what happened to Thornfield. He told me someone survived." Damien extended his hand slowly, palm up, a gesture of offering rather than taking. "I came to find you. Why?" The question was simple, but it carried weight that pressed against Damien's ancient heart. Why had he ridden through a killing storm? Why had he left his nightmare stallion behind, to walk through snow that reached his chest? Why had he killed 5 men without hesitation to protect a child he had never met? "Because once, long ago, I was where you are now," Damien said quietly. "Alone, hunted, certain that no one would come to help. And someone did come. Someone saved me when I had given up hope." He paused, remembering the vampire who had found him, who had offered turning as an escape from certain death, who had given him centuries of existence in exchange for a single night of choice. "I made a promise to myself that night, that if I ever had the power to save someone the way I was saved, I would use it, no matter the cost." The branch fell from the child's hands. Her face crumpled, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Damien opened his arms, and she threw herself into them, clutching at his frozen cloak like it was the only solid thing in a world that had become nightmare. "They killed everyone," she wailed into his chest. "Mama and Papa and my brother and everyone. They burned the houses and laughed, and I ran and I thought I was going to die, and—" "I know," Damien murmured, holding her as gently as his ancient strength allowed. "I know, but you are safe now. I have you. Nothing is going to hurt you." He held her while she cried, while the storm raged around them, while the bodies of her pursuers grew cold in the snow. He held her until her sobs subsided into hiccups, until her trembling became stillness, until she looked up at him with eyes that held the first fragile seeds of trust. "What's your name?" Damien asked softly. "Lily. Lily Thornfeld. Lily." He smiled, feeling the expression strange on his face after the violence of moments ago. "That is a beautiful name. My name's Damien. And I'm going to take you somewhere warm and safe, where no one will ever hurt you again. Promise?" The word hung between them, small and desperate, carrying all the weight of a child's need to believe that the world was not entirely dark. "I promise," Damien said, and he meant it with every fiber of his ancient being. The problem, of course, was getting her to warmth before the cold claimed what the hunters had failed to take. Lily was mortal, fragile, already suffering from exposure that would have killed many adults. Her lips were blue, her fingers nearly frozen, her small body shaking with a chill that went deeper than surface cold. Damien removed his cloak and wrapped it around her, pulling her close against his body. His own cold would not help warm her, but the cloak carried enchantments that would retain whatever heat she still possessed. He lifted her in his arms and began walking back the way he had come. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, her voice small and muffled against his chest. "To find my horse. Then to my fortress. It is warm there, and safe. How far?" Damien considered lying, considered telling her it was close when the truth was that miles of frozen wasteland separated them from Tempest, more miles still from the fortress. But she had endured enough lies tonight. She deserved truth, even when truth was hard. "Far," he admitted, "but I will carry you the whole way. I will not let you fall. I will not let the cold take you." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then her small hand found his and squeezed with surprising strength. "Okay," she said simply. "I trust you." Those 3 words, spoken by a child who had just watched her world burn, meant more to Damien than any praise from any lord across any century of his existence. The journey back was harder than the journey out. Damien had expended enormous energy in the fight, and the cold was taking its toll in ways he had not anticipated. Each step required conscious effort, each breath a battle against lungs that wanted to stop working entirely. But Lily was warm against his chest, her small heartbeat steady beneath the enchanted cloak, and that was enough to keep him moving. He found Tempest where he had left the nightmare, sheltered in a hollow between two massive boulders. The stallion had recovered somewhat, his dark eyes brightening as Damien approached, his supernatural energy flickering back to something resembling strength. But even recovered, Tempest could not carry both of them through the remaining storm. The nightmare had given everything on the journey out. There was nothing left for the journey back. "Rest," Damien told the stallion, pressing his forehead against Tempest's neck. "Find your way home when the storm breaks. I will walk." Tempest made a sound of protest, but Damien was already turning away, already continuing forward with Lily clutched against his chest. The nightmare would survive. The nightmare always survived. What mattered now was getting this child to warmth before her mortal body surrendered to the cold. The psychic channels crackled with activity as word of his survival spread. Lord Victor's voice came through first, carrying genuine surprise. "Ashford, you live. We had given you up for lost." "I found her," Damien transmitted back. "The survivor. I am bringing her home, through this storm." "On foot?" Victor's disbelief was palpable. "That is impossible. Even for an ancient, that is impossible." "Then it will be a night of impossible things, Lord Saroon." Duskfall's ancient voice entered the conversation, carrying weight that silenced the others. "How far from your fortress, Damien?" Damien calculated distances, factored in his deteriorating speed, considered the storm's intensity. 4 hours, perhaps 5, if I do not stop. And the child? He looked down at Lily, at the small face barely visible beneath the cloak's hood, at the eyes that had closed in exhausted sleep. "Holding, for now. But she needs warmth soon. Real warmth, not just enchanted fabric." Soren was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his mental voice carried something that sounded almost like respect. "There's a way station. An old one, from the time before territories were formalized. 2 miles north of your current position. It was built to shelter travelers during storms exactly like this one. I did not know such a place existed. Few do. It was abandoned centuries ago, when the old roads fell out of use. But the structure remains, and the enchantments that warm it should still function." Soren paused. "Get the child there, Damien. Rest until the storm passes. You cannot carry her through 5 more hours of this." The information was a lifeline thrown across miles of frozen darkness. Damien adjusted his course immediately, turning north, pushing through snow that seemed determined to swallow him whole. "Why are you helping me?" he asked Saren. "You have no stake in this child's survival, no connection to Thornfield or its people." "I have a stake in your survival," Saren replied. "You are one of the few lords who still remembers what it means to protect rather than prey. If you die tonight, something valuable dies with you. Something valuable survives with her," Damien said, looking down at Lily's sleeping face. "She is the last of her village, the last carrier of their stories, their memories, their way of life. If she dies, Thornfield dies completely. Then do not let her die. The way station is closer than you think. Keep moving." Damien kept moving. The 2 miles felt like 20, each step a negotiation with a body that wanted to stop, to rest, to surrender to the cold that promised peace if he would only close his eyes. But Lily's heartbeat kept him focused, her small warmth against his chest a constant reminder of why he could not give up. He almost missed the way station entirely. It was buried in snow. Only a corner of its stone roof visible above the white drifts that had accumulated over centuries of abandonment. But Saren's directions were precise, and Damien dug through the snow until he found the entrance, a heavy door inscribed with runes that still glowed faintly with ancient power. The door opened at his touch, recognizing something in his vampire blood that marked him as worthy of shelter. Warmth flowed out to greet him, the enchantment Soren had mentioned still functioning after all these years, still performing their intended purpose of protecting travelers from the killing cold. Damien stumbled inside and pushed the door closed behind him, shutting out the storm that had nearly claimed them both. The way station was small, a single room with a fireplace that blazed to life as he entered. Benches along the walls, supplies that had somehow remained preserved across the centuries. It was primitive compared to his fortress, barely more than a cave with pretensions of civilization. It was the most beautiful place Damien had ever seen. He laid Lily on one of the benches, checking her vital signs with hands that trembled from exhaustion. Her heartbeat was steady, her breathing was regular. The blue had faded from her lips, color returning as the way station's warmth penetrated the enchanted cloak. She would live. Against all odds, against everything the night had thrown at them, she would live. Damien sank to the floor beside her bench, his back against the warm stone wall, his eyes finally closing as the tension of the past hours released its grip on his ancient body. He should stay alert, should watch for danger, for the storm to break, for any threat that might emerge from the white chaos outside. But his body had reached its limits, had given everything it had to give, and now it demanded rest with a force that could not be denied. "Thank you," he murmured to Saren through the psychic connection, "for the way station, for believing I could reach it." "Thank yourself," Saren replied. "You did the impossible tonight, Damien. Remember that. When the other lords mock you, when they call you foolish for risking everything for one mortal child, remember what you proved." "What did I prove?" "That some things are worth doing regardless of cost. That some lives are worth saving regardless of odds. That we can still choose to be more than what our nature demands." Damien slept without dreams, his ancient body shutting down entirely to recover from the ordeal. When he awoke, the fire had burned low but still radiated warmth, and pale light filtered through cracks in the way station's shuttered windows. The storm had passed. Dawn had come and gone, taking with it the worst of the night's dangers. Lily was sitting up on her bench, watching him with eyes that held curiosity rather than fear. Someone had found supplies in the way station stores, and she was eating dried fruit with the methodical intensity of a child who had not eaten in far too long. "You snore," she said matter-of-factly. "For a vampire, I mean." "I didn't think vampires snored." Damien blinked, still disoriented from the depth of his rest. "I do not snore. You definitely snore. It sounds like a bear with a cold." She popped another piece of dried fruit into her mouth. "But I didn't mind. It meant you were still alive. Dead things don't snore." The logic was difficult to argue with. Damien pushed himself upright, wincing at the stiffness in joints that had been pushed far beyond their normal limits. He was weakened, he realized. The storm had drained him more than any battle, had taken reserves that would require days of rest and feeding to restore. But they were alive, both of them, alive and warming by an ancient fire in a way station that should not have existed. "How do you feel?" he asked Lily. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Hungry, tired, sad." Her voice caught on the last word, grief rising up to remind her of everything she had lost. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and it will all be a bad dream. That Mama will be there to make breakfast and Papa will be complaining about the chickens and my brother will be pulling my hair like he always does." "I know," Damien said quietly. "I know exactly how that feels." "Does it ever stop? The feeling like everything is wrong and will never be right again?" Damien moved to sit beside her on the bench, keeping a careful distance, not wanting to crowd her. "It changes. It never stops completely, but it changes. The sharp edges become dull. The constant pain becomes occasional aching. And eventually, you find new things to care about, new people to love, new reasons to keep living." "How long does that take?" "Different for everyone. For me, it took years. But I was alone for most of that time. You will not be alone." Lily looked at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "Because you're going to take care of me, like you promised." "Yes, if you want me to. What if I don't want to live with a vampire?" The question was asked without malice, simple curiosity from a child trying to understand her options. Damien appreciated her directness, appreciated that she was not pretending comfort she did not feel. "That I will find you somewhere else to live, somewhere safe, with people who will care for you. There are mortal families in the villages near my fortress who would welcome a child. Good people who have no connection to vampires beyond trading at the borders." Lily was quiet for a long moment, her small hands working at the edge of the enchanted cloak she still wore. "The hunters said vampires are evil, and they said everyone in Thornfield was corrupted because we let vampires protect us." "The hunters said many things. Most of them were lies. How do I know you're not lying too?" Damien considered the question carefully. She deserved an honest answer, not easy reassurances that would mean nothing to a child who had just watched everything she believed in burn. "You do not know," he admitted. "Not for certain. Trust is something that must be built over time, through actions rather than words. I can tell you that I risked my life to save you, that I killed the men who would have murdered you, that I carried you through a storm that nearly destroyed me. But those are just words until you see how I behave in the days and weeks and months ahead. So I just have to wait and see if you're evil or not. Yes, and if at any point you decide I am evil or simply that you do not wish to remain with me, I will help you leave. I will never force you to stay. I will never hurt you. These are promises I make freely, knowing that you have no reason to believe them yet." Lily studied him with an intensity that felt strange coming from such a young face. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, I'll wait and see. She returned to her dried fruit, apparently having resolved the matter to her satisfaction. But if you turn out to be evil, I'm going to hit you with something heavy and run away. Damien felt a smile tug at his lips despite everything. That seems fair. The psychic channels had been quiet during his rest, but now Lord Victor's voice intruded with news that erased any impulse toward humor. Ashford, you need to hear this. The Dawn Hunt is mobilizing in force. They have learned that you killed 5 of their number, that you took the child they were hunting. They are calling it an act of war. Damien felt his weakened body tense with fresh alarm. How many? 50 hunters. Perhaps more. They march toward your fortress as we speak, gathering followers from villages along the way. They claim you have enslaved a human child, that you intend to turn her, that you are the monster their faith has always warned about. Lies. All lies. Of course they are lies. But lies spread faster than truth, especially when they confirm what people already fear. Victor's mental voice carried genuine concern. You cannot fight 50 hunters in your current state. You can barely stand. If they reach your fortress before you recover, ... He did not need to finish the sentence. Damien understood perfectly. 50 fanatics, armed and driven by hatred against a weakened vampire and a traumatized child. The mathematics were brutal and simple. How long until they arrive? 2 days. Perhaps 3, depending on how many recruits they gather along the way. 2 days to recover enough strength to defend his home. 2 days to prepare for an assault he might not survive. 2 days to keep a promise he had made to a child who had just begun to trust him. Then I had better start moving, Damien said, rising from the bench despite his body's protests. We have a long walk ahead. The journey from the way station to the fortress took the rest of the day and most of the following night. Damien carried Lily when she could not walk, walked beside her when she insisted on using her own legs, and stopped to rest when her small body simply could not continue. She was stronger than she looked, this survivor of Thornfield. But she was still a child who had endured horrors that would have broken many adults. They talked as they traveled, filling the miles with words that built something fragile between them. Lily told him about her family, about the father who had been a blacksmith, the mother who had sung while she cooked, the brother who had been annoying but whom she missed with an ache that made her voice break. She told him about Lord Verone, the vampire who had protected Thornfield, who had been kind and fair and nothing like the monsters in the stories. He used to visit the village on festival nights, Lily said, her eyes distant with memory. He would bring gifts for the children and dance with the old women who had no partners. Everyone loved him. What happened to him? During the attack, he fought them. The hunters. He killed many of them before ... Her voice faltered. Before they overwhelmed him. There were so many. Too many. He told everyone to run while he held them off. Lord Verone had died protecting his people, had sacrificed himself to give them a chance to escape. The fact that most had not escaped, that the storm and the hunters had claimed them anyway, did not diminish what he had done. He had been a good lord. A protector in truth rather than merely in name. He sounds like a worthy vampire, Damien said quietly. He was. He really was. Lily looked up at him with eyes that held the beginning of something like hope. Are you like him? A good vampire? I try to be. I do not always succeed, but I try. Tempest found them as they approached the fortress, the nightmare stallion emerging from the tree line with a whinny of relief that was almost comical, coming from such a fearsome creature. The horse had recovered fully, his supernatural energy restored, his dark coat gleaming with health that seemed impossible given what he had endured. Your horse is scary, Lily observed, hanging back as Tempest approached. He is a nightmare, a different kind of creature than a normal horse. But he will not hurt you. Damien held out his hand, and Tempest pressed his massive head against it with surprising gentleness. He knows you are under my protection. Lily approached cautiously, her small hand eventually finding Tempest's neck. The nightmare stood perfectly still, allowing the touch, his dark eyes watching her with something that might have been curiosity. He's warm, Lily said, surprised. I thought he would be cold like you. Nightmares are creatures of shadow and fire. The fire burns beneath the shadow. Damien lifted her onto Tempest's back, then mounted behind her. Hold tight. We will reach the fortress within the hour. The fortress rose from the landscape like a promise of safety, its dark walls a barrier against the world that had proven so cruel. Damien's staff rushed to greet them as they approached. Vampires and mortal servants alike expressing relief at their lord's return and curiosity about the child he carried. "Prepare chambers in the east wing," Damien commanded as he dismounted. "Warm food, warm baths, warm beds. And summon the captain of the guard. We have much to discuss." The preparations for the Dawn Hunt's arrival began immediately. Damien's fortress was well defended, built centuries ago to withstand siege, but 50 fanatics represented a threat that could not be dismissed. He organized patrols, reinforced weak points in the walls, and sent messages to allied lords requesting assistance. The responses were mixed. Some lords promised support that would arrive within days. Others declined to involve themselves in what they called a mortal matter. Lord Victor sent regrets along with strategic advice. Lord Marcus sent nothing at all. But Lord Saren's response was different. "I am coming myself," the ancient vampire transmitted, "with my personal guard. 20 vampires, all ancient, all experienced in combat. They will reach you before the hunters do." Damien felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had not realized he was carrying. "Why? You have no obligation to risk yourself for my territory. I told you before. You're valuable. What you represent is valuable." Saren's mental voice carried weight that went beyond mere words. "And perhaps I am tired of watching good vampires stand alone against hatred, while the rest of us hide behind our walls and pretend the problem will solve itself. The other lords will talk. They will say, 'You have gone soft.' Let them talk. Let them whisper about Soren Duskfall's sentimentality. Their whispers mean nothing against the silence of the dead." The ancient lord paused. "Besides, I have a debt to pay. A very old debt. From a time when I let fear stop me from helping someone who needed me. Perhaps this is my chance to balance those scales." Lily found Damien in his study that evening, her small form silhouetted in the doorway. She had bathed and changed into clean clothes that were too large for her, sleeves rolled up and hem dragging on the floor. She looked like a child playing dress-up in adult clothing. She looked like the survivor she was. "The servants are scared," she said, entering without invitation and settling into a chair across from his desk. "They think the hunters are going to kill everyone. The servants worry too much." "Are they wrong to worry?" Damien considered lying, considered protecting her from truths she was too young to carry. But she had already carried truths that would have crushed most adults. She had earned honesty. "No, they are not wrong. The Dawn Hunt is dangerous. Many hunters are coming, and they are coming because of me, because I saved you. So this is my fault?" "No." Damien's voice was firm. "This is the fault of men who hate what they do not understand. Men who would rather kill than question their beliefs. You did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. The only ones at fault are those who chose violence over tolerance." Lily absorbed this, her young face serious. "What can I do? To help, I mean. I don't want to just hide while everyone else fights. You can survive. That is the most important thing you can do. Survive, and remember Thornfield, and carry their stories forward into whatever future waits beyond this night." Lord Saren arrived the following evening, his entourage of ancient vampires flowing through the fortress gates like shadows given form. They were impressive, these warriors who had survived millennia, their presence carrying a weight that made the air itself feel heavier. Damien met them in the courtyard, still weakened from his ordeal, but standing straight through sheer force of will. Saren was older than Damien had imagined, his face carrying the particular stillness that came only with extreme age, his eyes holding depths that suggested he had seen civilizations rise and fall like seasonal tides. He studied Damien for a long moment before speaking. "You look terrible," Soren observed. "The storm nearly killed you." "The storm tried. It failed. Barely, from what I can sense." Saren's gaze shifted to something behind Damien. "And this must be the child who inspired such magnificent foolishness." Damien turned to find Lily standing in the doorway, her small form wrapped in borrowed clothes, her eyes wide as she took in the ancient vampire and his warriors. She did not retreat, did not hide. She simply stood and watched with the careful attention of someone learning to evaluate threats. "This is Lily Thornfeld," Damien said, "the last survivor of her village." Soren approached the child slowly, his movements deliberately gentle. He knelt before her, bringing his ancient eyes level with hers, and studied her with an intensity that would have frightened most adults. "You have seen terrible things," Soren said quietly, "things no child should witness. But you are still standing, still fighting. That speaks well of you." Lily met his gaze without flinching. "Lord Damien saved me. The hunters would have killed me, and he stopped them, I know. He risked everything for you. Do you understand what that means? It means he's good, even though he's a vampire, even though everyone says vampires are monsters." Soren smiled, an expression that transformed his ancient face into something almost warm. It means more than that, child. It means that you matter, that your life has value beyond calculation, that someone looked at the odds and the dangers and decided that saving you was worth any cost. He rose, turning back to Damien. She is remarkable. I begin to understand why you did what you did. I would have done it for any child in the same situation. I know. That is precisely what makes it remarkable. The preparations intensified with Saren's forces adding their strength to the defense. The ancient vampires moved through the fortress with professional efficiency, identifying vulnerabilities, establishing defensive positions, preparing for a siege that might last hours or might last days. They worked alongside Damien's own guards, sharing knowledge accumulated across centuries of warfare. Lily followed them everywhere, asking questions with the relentless curiosity of a child who had decided that understanding was better than fear. The ancient warriors tolerated her presence with surprising patience, answering her questions, explaining their preparations, treating her as a participant rather than a burden. She reminds me of someone, Soren told Damien that evening, as they watched Lily help organize supplies in the Great Hall. Someone I knew a very long time ago. Someone I failed to protect when protection was needed. The debt you mentioned. Yes, Saren's voice carried grief that had not faded despite the centuries. Her name was Mira. She was human, like Lily, young and curious and full of questions. She lived in a village that sought my protection, and I gave it freely because she asked so nicely. He fell silent for a moment, watching Lily move among the supplies with careful attention. When the hunters came for her village, I hesitated. I calculated the risks, weighed the costs, considered whether intervention was worth the consequences. By the time I decided to act, it was too late. Mira was dead. Everyone was dead. You could not have known. I knew enough. I knew they were in danger. I knew I had the power to help. I simply chose to delay until choosing became meaningless. Saren's ancient eyes found Damien's. You did not hesitate. You did not calculate. You heard that a child needed help and you rode into a killing storm without a moment's doubt. That is the difference between us. That is why I am here. You are here to balance scales that can never truly balance, perhaps. Or perhaps I am here because watching you act reminded me of who I wanted to be once, before caution became cowardice and wisdom became excuse. Soren turned away, his voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. Either way, I am here, and when the hunters come, they will find more than they bargained for. The hunters arrived on the third day, exactly as Victor had predicted. 53 of them, Damien counted from the fortress walls. Armed with weapons blessed by their twisted faith, driven by hatred that had been refined into religious fervor. They made camp just beyond arrow range, their fires dotting the landscape like fallen stars. Their leader rode forward under a flag of parley, a massive man whose face bore scars from previous battles against vampires. He stopped at the edge of negotiating distance and shouted his demands with a voice that carried across the frozen ground. Lord Ashford, you have taken what belongs to us. The child is corrupted by vampire influence and must be purified. Surrender her, and we will leave your territory in peace. Refuse, and we will take her by force and burn your fortress to ash. Damien stood on the wall above, flanked by Saren and his own captain of the guard. He let the silence stretch, let the hunter's words hang in the cold air before responding. The child belongs to no one but herself. She is not corrupted. She is not property. She is a survivor of a massacre your people committed, and I will not surrender her to the monsters who murdered her family. We are not monsters. We are purifiers. We cleanse the world of vampire corruption. You are murderers who hide behind faith to justify atrocity. Damien's voice carried cold certainty that made several hunters step backward. You killed innocents. You hunted a child through a storm. You call yourselves righteous, while committing sins that would damn you in any just accounting. The hunter leader's face contorted with fury. You will regret those words, vampire. When we breach your walls and drag that child to justice, you will beg for mercy. I never beg, Damien said quietly, and you will never breach these walls. He turned and walked away, leaving the hunter screaming threats at stone that did not care. The siege began at midnight. The hunters attacked in waves, their blessed weapons glowing with faint light as they struck against fortress walls that had withstood assaults for centuries. They were disciplined, Damien had to admit. Fanatical, but organized, their hatred channeled into tactical precision that spoke of experienced leadership. But they were also mortal, and they faced defenders who had been fighting wars before their great-grandparents were born. Saren's ancient vampires moved along the walls like shadows given lethal purpose, striking down climbers before they could reach the battlements, disrupting formations with targeted attacks that left hunters scattered and confused. Damien's own guards held their positions with steady determination, raining arrows and hurling stones at any enemy who came within range. Lily watched from a high window, despite Damien's orders to remain in the inner chambers. He found her there during a lull in the fighting, her small face pale but determined as she observed the chaos below. "You should not be watching this," Damien said, moving to stand beside her. "I need to see. I need to understand what they are willing to do." Her voice was steady, older than her years. "If I hide from it, I won't really know. And I need to know." "Why?" "Because someday I want to stop people like them. I want to make sure what happened to Thornfield never happens to anyone else." She looked up at him with eyes that burned with quiet fire. "You saved me so I could live. I want to live for something that matters." Damien felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of purpose that mirrored his own. This child had lost everything, had been hunted and terrorized, had witnessed horrors that would haunt her forever. And instead of breaking, she was already thinking about how to prevent others from suffering the same fate. "That is a worthy goal," he said quietly. "When this is over, we will talk about how to achieve it. Promise." "Promise." The hunters launched their largest assault at dawn, apparently hoping that the rising sun would weaken the vampire defenders. It was a reasonable strategy against lesser vampires, who grew sluggish and vulnerable in daylight. But Saren's ancients had long since conquered that weakness, and Damien himself had learned to function in daylight centuries ago. The attack broke against walls that held firm, against defenders who did not falter, against a determination that matched the hunter's fanaticism with something more sustainable. By midday, the hunter forces had lost a third of their number, and their leader was screaming increasingly desperate commands at men whose faith was beginning to crack. "They will retreat soon," Soren observed, standing beside Damien on the wall as the sun reached its peak. "Their losses are unsustainable. Their leader knows it even if he refuses to admit it. Or they will make one final, desperate charge, hoping to overwhelm us through sheer fury." Also possible. Fanatics rarely choose the rational path. Saren's ancient eyes scanned the enemy camp, reading patterns invisible to younger vampires. "But I think not. Look at their body language. They are exhausted, demoralized, questioning whether their cause is worth dying for. Their leader will not let them question. Their leader will not have a choice. Faith can sustain men through much, but it cannot sustain them through everything. Eventually, survival instinct overcomes ideology." The final charge came at sunset. 40 hunters rushing the gates with a battering ram they had constructed from fallen trees. It was a desperate gamble, a last attempt to breach defenses that had held through 12 hours of continuous assault. The hunter leader led the charge himself, his scarred face contorted with fury that had become indistinguishable from madness. Damien met him at the gate. He had conserved his strength throughout the siege, knowing that this moment would come, knowing that the leader would eventually commit himself to personal combat. Now he stepped through the gates as they opened, facing the charging hunters alone while his defenders watched from the walls. "You want the child?" Damien called across the closing distance. "Come and take her," the leader screamed something incoherent, and swung his blessed sword with all the strength his mortal body possessed. Damien caught the blade, felt its holy energy burn his palm, and did not care. Pain was temporary. Purpose was eternal. He broke the sword with a twist of his wrist, then broke the arm that had wielded it. The leader fell, screaming, and suddenly the charge was faltering. Hunters stumbling to a halt as they watched their champion crumble before a vampire who should have been weakened by daylight, should have been exhausted by siege, should have been anything but the unstoppable force that now stood before them. "Leave," Damien said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Leave now, and I will let you live. Continue fighting, and none of you will see another dawn." The hunters looked at their fallen leader, at the ancient vampires watching from the walls, at the bodies of their comrades scattered across the ground. They looked at each other, and something passed between them, some silent acknowledgement that faith could not overcome reality. They ran. Damien watched them go, watched them abandon their wounded leader, watched them flee into the gathering darkness like the cowards they had always been beneath their righteous masks. He felt no satisfaction in their retreat, only exhaustion and relief, and a desperate hope that this was truly over. The hunter leader lay at his feet, cradling his broken arm, his face twisted with pain and hatred. "This changes nothing," he spat. "Others will come." The Dawn Hunt is larger than one battle. We will never stop until every vampire is destroyed and every human who serves them is purified. Damien knelt beside him, bringing his face close to the man who had ordered the massacre of Thornfield, who had hunted Lily through a killing storm, who had brought war to his doorstep for the crime of saving a child. "Then I will stop every one of you who comes," Damien said quietly. "I will defend the innocent against your hatred for as long as I exist. And when I am gone, others will rise to take my place. Because hatred like yours always creates its own opposition, always inspires people to stand against it." He stood, turning his back on the broken man. "Take him to the border and release him. Let him carry word of what happened here to whatever remains of his organization." "You're letting me live?" The leader's voice carried disbelief. "I'm letting you carry a message. That message is simple. We will not be intimidated. We will not surrender. We will protect those who need protecting, regardless of cost." Damien walked back through the gates, leaving the hunter to contemplate mercy he did not deserve and would never understand. The aftermath of battle brought a strange quietness to the fortress. Wounded were tended, damage was assessed, and the dead were honored with rituals that acknowledged their sacrifice. Damien moved through the process with practiced efficiency, but his mind remained fixed on the small figure who had watched from the high window, who had seen violence and chosen to dream of prevention rather than revenge. Lily found him in the great hall as the last of the wounded were carried to the healing chambers. She walked across the stone floor with careful steps, her borrowed clothes still too large, her young face carrying shadows that would never fully fade. But there was something else in her expression now, something that looked almost like peace. "It's over?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his. "This battle is over. The war against hatred is never truly finished." Damien looked at her with eyes that had seen too many endings and too few beginnings. "But you are safe. That is what matters most, for now. But you said others might come. Others might always come. The question is not whether danger exists, but how we choose to face it." He paused, considering how much truth she could bear. "I cannot promise you a world without threats, but I can promise that I will face those threats beside you for as long as you wish to remain." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I want to stay. I want to learn how to protect people the way you protected me. I want to make sure no other village becomes another Thornfield." "That is a large ambition for someone so young." "I'm not that young. Not anymore." Her voice carried weight that made Damien's ancient heart ache. The hunters made sure of that. Lord Soren approached them, his ancient face showing something that might have been approval. His warriors had begun departing at sunset, returning to territories that required their protection. But the old lord himself had lingered, apparently unwilling to leave until certain matters were settled. "The child speaks wisdom beyond her years," Soren observed, settling into a chair across from them. "She has the makings of something remarkable, if properly guided." "She has the makings of whatever she chooses to become," Damien corrected. "My role is to provide opportunity, not to shape her into something that serves my purposes." Soren smiled, that rare expression that transformed his ancient features. "You see, this is why I came. This is why I risked my warriors for your defense. Because you understand something that most vampire lords have forgotten." "What is that?" "That power is not the point. That strength means nothing if it serves only itself. That the measure of a lord is not what he takes but what he protects." Soren's eyes moved too. "Lily, you rode into a killing storm for this child. You faced certain death to save one mortal life. And in doing so, you reminded me of truths I had buried beneath centuries of caution and compromise. I did only what needed to be done. Precisely. And that simplicity is what makes it profound." Soren rose, his ancient bones creaking despite his supernatural nature. "I am returning to my territory, but I want you to know that you have an ally in me. Whatever challenges arise, whatever enemies gather against you, you can call upon Soren Duskfall and know that help will come." "Why?" "We barely knew each other before this, because Mira would have wanted me to help someone like you. Because the debt I owe her memory can only be paid through actions, not regrets." Soren placed his hand on Damien's shoulder, a gesture of connection between ancient beings who had found common ground in the most unexpected circumstances. "Take care of the child, teach her what she needs to know. And remember that the impossible is often simply the untried." He departed with the dignity of his centuries, leaving Damien and Lily alone in the great hall as torches flickered and shadows danced across stone walls that had witnessed so much history. "He's old," Lily observed. "Really, really old." Older than you even. Much older. He was ancient when I was termed, and I have walked this world for 700 years. Lily considered this with the mathematical intensity of a child trying to comprehend numbers beyond normal experience. Will you be that old someday? Will you forget things like he forgot and need someone to remind you? Perhaps. Immortality is long, and memory is imperfect even for vampires. Damien looked at her with something approaching wonder. But I think you have already reminded me of things I had begun to forget. Things about why existence matters, about why protecting the innocent is worth any cost. What things? That every life is valuable. That one child is worth riding through a storm. That the measure of who we are is not what we accomplish for ourselves, but what we sacrifice for others. He smiled, feeling the expression strange after so much grimness. You taught me these things simply by surviving, simply by refusing to give up, simply by being worth saving. Lily reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her small fingers were warm against his cold skin. Mortal warmth meeting vampire chill in a connection that bridged the vast gulf between their natures. I'm glad you came for me, she said quietly. I'm glad you were the kind of vampire who rides into storms instead of hiding from them. I am glad as well. More glad than I can express. They sat together as the night deepened, as the fortress settled into something approaching normalcy, as the future stretched ahead of them full of challenges they would face together. The dawn hunt was broken, but not destroyed. Other threats would emerge. Other battles would need to be fought. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of victory, a vampire lord and a mortal child found something neither had expected to find. Family, perhaps. Purpose, certainly. And hope, most importantly of all, hope that the world could be better, that hatred could be overcome, that one person's choice to ride into the storm could create ripples that changed everything. Damien had been the last survivor once, alone and hunted, and certain that no one would come to help. Someone had come for him, had given him centuries of existence, had made possible everything he had become. Now, he had done the same for Lily. And someday, perhaps, she would do the same for someone else. That was enough. That was more than enough. Asterisk. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale. Asterisk.